The airport was busy that morning, filled with people rushing to catch their flights, dragging shiny luggage, talking on phones, and sipping coffee in a hurry. Among the crowd walked a woman named Amara Hayes, dressed in a simple black coat, carrying only one leather handbag. Her hair was tied neatly, and her eyes were calm. She didn't look rich. She didn't wear diamonds, no designer labels, and no one gave her a second look. But under that quiet appearance was one of the most powerful women in the aviation industry, the CEO of the very airline she was about to fly on. Amara had made a decision few in her position would dare. She wanted to see for herself how her employees treated passengers, not when they knew a VIP was watching, but when they thought no one important was there. She booked a luxury class ticket under a false name, Miss Allen, using a personal card that didn't reveal her title. She didn't request any special services or extra attention. She wanted to be treated like any other traveler. As she approached the check-in counter, the staff barely looked up. The young woman behind the desk gave a mechanical smile and said, "Passport, please." Amara handed it over politely. The staff tapped a few keys, sighed, and handed her the boarding pass. "Gate 12. Boarding in 40 minutes, she said quickly without making eye contact. Amara simply nodded and thanked her. But in her heart she noticed the tone, rushed, dismissive, uninterested. She walked toward the gate. Observing quietly around her, some staff laughed loudly while ignoring an elderly couple who needed help with their luggage. A small boy dropped his toy near the counter, but no one bothered to pick it up. Amara stopped, smiled at the child, and handed him the toy. "Here you go." "Sweetheart," she said softly. The boy's mother smiled gratefully. "Thank you," she whispered, not realizing she was speaking to the woman who owned the airline. As Amara waited near the gate, she overheard two flight attendants chatting nearby. "We've got a full flight today," one said, rolling her eyes. "I hope we don't get any demanding passengers in first class." "I can't stand the entitled ones," the other laughed. "As long as they look rich, I'll smile, the rest can wait." They both laughed again, and Amara felt a small ache in her chest, not anger and disappointment. When boarding was announced, she walked with the first-class passengers, showing her pass quietly. The attendant at the door smiled at the man in front of her, greeting him warmly. "Welcome, Mr. Anderson." Then she looked at Amara's ticket. Her smile faded a little. "Seat 2A, please turn left," she said quickly and turned to the next person. Amara nodded. "Thank you." Her voice was gentle, her tone respectful. Inside the cabin, everything looked perfect. Soft lights, comfortable seats, and quiet music. A flight attendant walked by offering champagne to some passengers but skipped her row. She noticed but didn't say a word. Instead, she sat back and looked out the window, thinking of how many times passengers had written complaints about unequal treatment. She wanted to see the truth, and now she was. A businessman sitting next to her looked at her politely. "First time flying luxury class?" he asked, noticing her simple clothes. Amara smiled. "Not really, but it's been a while." He nodded and leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Be prepared. These attendants only serve the ones they think are rich." He laughed lightly. Not realizing the irony, she smiled back. "That's good to know." As the plane filled, the cabin crew moved busily, serving drinks, adjusting blankets, and welcoming certain passengers with extra warmth. Amara watched closely, noting who received attention and who didn't. A young woman with a baby asked politely for help storing her bag, but the attendant frowned. "You'll have to manage it yourself, ma'am," she said curtly. Amara stood and helped the mother place the bag safely. "There, all done," she said with a kind smile. The mother thanked her. "You're so kind." "Not like the crew." Amara only nodded. "Sometimes kindness travels quietly," she whispered when the plane finally took off. The cabin lights dimmed and dinner service began. The attendant started serving the passengers in the front rows first, offering them gourmet dishes and drinks. Everyone was given a menu except Amara. She waited patiently, thinking it might be a mistake. But when the last tray passed her by, she realized she had been ignored completely. She pressed the service button gently. A few minutes later, an attendant appeared, looking slightly irritated. "Yes, ma'am?" Amara smiled politely. "I think I haven't received my meal yet," the attendant sighed. "Oh, we've run out of luxury meals. You can have an economy tray if you'd like." Her tone was flat, almost mocking. Amara paused for a moment, her eyes soft. "That's fine." "I'll take it," she said. The woman blinked, surprised that the passenger didn't argue. She brought the tray without care, dropping it on the table roughly. "Enjoy," she muttered and walked off. Amara looked at the plain meal. Dry bread, no dessert, and a plastic cup of water around her. The other passengers ate fine meals served with smiles and wine, yet she didn't complain. She ate quietly, slowly, with dignity. One man nearby noticed and whispered, "That's unfair," she smiled. "It's all right. Some lessons come best when people think you're nobody." After finishing, she opened her notebook and began to write calmly, jotting every detail: who ignored her, who laughed, who helped others. Her handwriting was steady, her expression unreadable to anyone else. She looked like a tired businesswoman keeping notes for work, but in truth, she was documenting the biggest internal review her airline had ever seen. When the attendant passed again, Amara looked up and said softly, "Thank you for your service," the woman frowned, unsure why her tone sounded so kind despite the poor treatment. As the plane continued its long journey across the Atlantic, Amara leaned back and closed her eyes. The hum of the engines surrounded her. She thought of her employees, of the values she built her company on: respect, equality, dignity. She knew what she had to do when they landed, but she didn't feel angry. She felt calm, determined, and quietly powerful to everyone on that plane. She was just a simple woman who didn't look rich enough to matter. But the truth was, she was the one who signed their paychecks, owned their uniforms, and carried the future of their company in her notebook. And by the time the wheels touched down in New York, the flight crew had no idea that their world was about to change forever. The engines roared softly as the plane climbed into the clouds, and the passengers settled into their luxury seats. The air smelled faintly of perfume and expensive wine. The attendants smiled brightly at the wealthy passengers in front. But when they passed by Amara's seat, their tone changed, polite but cold. The woman sitting quietly in 2A didn't look like she belonged there. No diamonds, no designer bag, no show of wealth, just calm eyes and a soft smile that confused them. As the seatbelt lights turned off, the flight attendants began serving drinks. They stopped first at a famous businessman seated across the aisle, offering him champagne with practiced charm. "For you, sir," one of them said sweetly. He smiled and nodded, clearly enjoying the attention. When they reached Amara's row, their politeness thinned. "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" one asked quickly, eyes already drifting to the next passenger. Amara smiled gently. "Just water, please," she said. The attendant nodded without expression, poured her half a glass and moved on. A few passengers noticed the difference but said nothing. They had grown used to seeing the invisible divide. One smile for the rich, one tone for everyone else. Amara leaned back, quietly observing. The hum of the plane was soothing, and she used that moment to think. She had built this airline to stand for comfort, equality, and respect. Yet what she saw here was arrogance and neglect disguised as luxury service. It hurt more than angered her, not because she was ignored, but because she saw how easily kindness had been replaced by judgment. When the attendants began distributing menus, she noticed they skipped her again. Every other seat had a glossy menu, filled with choices of fine meals. She pressed the service button softly. A tall flight attendant approached. His smile strained. "Yes, ma'am." "Could I please get a menu?" she asked politely. The attendant paused, glancing at her coat and handbag, then said, "We might be short on menus, but don't worry. The meal options are the same for everyone." His tone suggested she wouldn't know the difference anyway. Amara's smile never faded. "That's all right, I'll wait," she replied. The attendant gave a short nod and walked off, muttering something under his breath to a colleague. They both chuckled quietly, thinking she couldn't hear, but Amara caught every word. She didn't react, only took out her small notebook and began jotting something down in neat handwriting. Later, when the meal service began, the same attendant returned, serving plates to everyone around her. Each dish was placed carefully, with warm smiles and words like, "Enjoy your meal, sir," or "Would you like an extra dessert, ma'am?" But when he reached her, his tone grew dry again. "We're out of luxury meals," he said casually. "Would you be fine with an economy meal instead?" The nearby passengers exchanged awkward glances. One woman gasped quietly, but the attendant didn't notice. Amara looked up at him with calm eyes. "If that's what's available, I'll take it," she said. He placed a small plastic tray before her, simple rice, bread, and a small water cup, so different from the elegant plates everyone else received. One passenger whispered, "That's not right," but Amara only smiled. "It's fine," she said softly. The moment seemed to hang in the air. Some of the richer passengers turned away, pretending not to see. A few attendants giggled quietly near the galley, whispering that some people don't belong in luxury class. One of them even said under her breath, "Money can buy a seat, but not class." Amara heard it all, but her face remained peaceful. She took a slow bite of the plain food and looked out the window, watching the golden sunset reflect off the clouds. In her heart, she felt no anger, only sadness. The airline she built was supposed to be a place where every person was treated with grace. But somewhere along the way, her employees had learned to judge instead of serve. A few rows ahead, an elderly man tried to get an attendant's attention for water. He waved politely, but they ignored him. Amara stood up quietly, walked to the galley, and picked up a bottle. She poured the man a glass herself. "Here you go, sir," she said kindly. The old man smiled gratefully. "Thank you, young lady. That was very kind of you." She nodded. "Everyone deserves a little kindness," she said softly and returned to her seat. The attendant stared, embarrassed, unsure what to say. One whispered, "Who does she think she is?" Amara sat down calmly and took a small breath, pulling her notebook again. She wrote slowly, "Crew lacks empathy, chooses faces to serve, treats humility as weakness." Her handwriting was firm and deliberate. The same note would later appear in the company's internal audit, but no one knew it yet. When the lead attendant passed by again, she smiled awkwardly and said, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. It's been a busy day." Her apology sounded mechanical, rehearsed. Amara looked at her kindly. "Busy days happen, but kindness doesn't take time." The woman blinked, unsure how to respond, then nodded and walked away quickly. The rest of the flight passed quietly. Some passengers began whispering about her, guessing who she might be. A few thought she was a mystery evaluator. Others thought she was just a calm woman with good manners. No one guessed that the woman they ignored was the one whose signature was printed on their payslips. As the cabin lights dimmed for the night, Amara sat still, looking out at the endless stretch of stars. Her reflection in the window was calm, but her mind was sharp. She had seen everything she needed to see. Every smile that vanished when a passenger looked ordinary. Every tone that shifted depending on money or status. She now knew the truth she had come to find. Her airline had forgotten its heart. She leaned her head against the seat and whispered softly to herself, "They will remember after this flight lands." Then she closed her eyes, resting peacefully, while somewhere in the front of the cabin, the crew laughed carelessly, unaware that their fates had already been sealed 30,000 feet above the clouds. The sky outside turned dark blue as the plane continued across the Atlantic. The cabin lights dimmed, and most passengers began to sleep or watch movies. But Amara stayed awake, sitting quietly in her seat. The soft hum of the engines gave her time to think. She had seen enough in just a few hours to understand the truth. Her airline had lost its soul. The staff smiled only for money and ignored the ones who didn't look powerful. She glanced around the cabin, noticing small details most people would overlook. A passenger in front of her had dropped his napkin, but when he asked for help, the flight attendant walked past without hearing him. Another passenger pressed the service button twice and was ignored. The attendants gathered near the galley, laughing and scrolling on their phones. They were supposed to be the face of the company, but what she saw was carelessness. Amara sighed softly, opened her brown notebook, and began to write. Her handwriting was elegant and neat. She wrote everything she saw: names, gestures, attitudes, even the exact words they used when refusing her meal. She wasn't angry, but deeply disappointed. She had worked years to build a brand of class and respect, and yet here she was, being treated as if kindness had a price tag. After a while, she stood up to stretch her legs, walking slowly toward the back of the cabin. As she passed, one attendant whispered to another, "There she goes again. She's been writing since takeoff. Probably writing a complaint letter." The other one laughed quietly. "Letter? We deal with hundreds like her." Amara heard every word but didn't react. Instead, she walked toward the restroom and paused when she saw a young mother struggling with her crying baby. The woman looked tired and embarrassed, holding her baby close. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the man beside her. "He's scared of flying." Amara smiled softly and knelt down beside her. "May I?" she asked gently. The mother nodded, surprised. Amara took out a small silver pendant from her bag. a tiny music charm that played a soft lullaby when pressed. "It used to calm my daughter," she said, and placed it near the baby's ear. The child stopped crying within seconds. The mother's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you so much," Amara smiled. "Don't thank me, ma'am. We all just need someone kind sometimes." Then she stood and returned to her seat quietly. A few passengers nearby had witnessed the moment, whispering among themselves, "Who is she?" "She acts like she owns the place," one man said, half amused, half impressed. "Maybe she does," another replied jokingly. And though they didn't know it yet, he was right. Moments later, the lead attendant came walking down the aisle. Stopping near Amara, her tone was polite but stiff. "Ma'am, we'd appreciate it if you stay seated during the flight for safety reasons. Please let the crew handle passenger issues." Amara looked up at her calmly. "I didn't mean to interfere. I was just helping someone who needed it." The attendant gave a tight smile. "We understand. But you're in a luxury class cabin, ma'am, and we have procedures." Amara tilted her head slightly, her eyes calm but sharp. "Procedures shouldn't stop compassion," she said softly. The attendant blinked, caught off guard. "Of course," she said quickly. "I'll keep that in mind." Then she walked off, trying to look confident, though her hands were trembling slightly. Something about this woman's quiet tone unsettled her. Back at the galley, the attendants whispered again. "She's so strange," one muttered. "She talks like a boss or something." "She's probably one of those rich clients pretending to be humble," another said. "Don't take her seriously." Meanwhile, Amara closed her notebook and took out her phone. She opened the internal company portal under her secret username and began checking recent employee complaints. Dozens of reports filled the screen. Delayed service, rude staff, unprofessional conduct, the same behavior she had just witnessed. Her chest tightened as she scrolled. "So it's true," she murmured. "They've forgotten what respect means." The captain's voice suddenly came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing in New York in a few hours. Please sit back and relax." Amara looked out the window again, seeing the endless ocean below. Her reflection stared back at her. Calm, patient, powerful. She thought about how she used to sit in this same seat years ago as a young flight attendant, before she rose through the ranks. Back then, she had promised herself she'd never let her airline lose its heart. And yet here she was, proving that promise had been broken. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. It was the same young mother from earlier, standing near her seat. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I just wanted to thank you again for helping me." "You were kinder than the entire crew," Amara smiled. "You don't have to thank me, ma'am," she said warmly. "But I do appreciate your words." The woman hesitated. "You remind me of someone," she said. "You have that calm look. Like someone who leads." Amara chuckled softly. "Maybe once upon a time," she replied. When the woman left, Amara's smile faded into thought. Maybe this journey wasn't just an inspection. Maybe it was a test of her own creation. She realized something powerful that night. You don't need to shout to show authority. True power speaks in silence. As the cabin lights dimmed further, she wrote one final note in her book before closing it gently. "Respect is the meal every passenger deserves, and no one should ever go hungry for it." She closed her eyes for a moment, the hum of the plane surrounding her like a steady heartbeat. Outside, the stars twinkled across the sky. And deep down, Amara knew when this plane touched the ground, everything was about to change, not just for the crew, but for the company she built with her heart. The flight continued through the night, the cabin wrapped in a dim golden glow. Passengers slept or whispered quietly, unaware that 30,000 feet above the earth, Justice was quietly taking notes. Amara sat upright, calm as ever, her brown notebook resting on her lap. She wasn't angry anymore, just disappointed. The airline that carried her name, her dream, had become something she barely recognized, and the people who were supposed to represent it had forgotten what service meant. As the hours passed, she noticed the crew becoming more careless. They gathered in the galley, laughing softly, one of them scrolling on her phone, another nibbling snacks meant for passengers. A few first-class travelers tried pressing the service buttons, but no one responded. One man, clearly irritated, stood up to complain, but the lead attendant's smile was practiced and hollow. "We're a bit short-staffed tonight, sir. Please be patient," she said with a fake tone of sweetness. Then she turned to her coworker and muttered, "These people act like they own the plane." Amara heard that clearly. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "If only you knew," she thought quietly. She reached for her pen again and wrote a few words in her notebook. They speak of respect as if it's optional. Moments later, turbulence hit. The plane jolted sharply. The cabin lights flickered and gasps filled the air. The crew's laughter stopped instantly. Fear replaced their smiles, and they scrambled to look professional again. Everyone please fasten your seatbelts, shouted the lead attendant, her voice shaking slightly. Passengers obeyed quickly, some clutching their armrests. Others looking around nervously. Amara stayed calm, gently helping the elderly man beside her secure his belt. It's all right, she said softly. This won't last long. The old man nodded, his wrinkled hand trembling. She placed her hand over his for comfort. Her calmness was contagious. The nearby passengers relaxed just watching her. The turbulence lasted several minutes, and when it finally ended, the cabin fell silent. The passengers sighed in relief, but instead of offering comfort, one attendant snapped at a woman who had stood up to check her crying child. Ma'am, sit down immediately, we're not done yet, she barked. The woman apologized quickly, embarrassed. The harshness in the attendant's tone echoed through the cabin. Amara turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting the attendant's for a second. Her gaze wasn't angry, but it carried weight, quiet authority. The attendant looked away immediately, uneasy when the seatbelt lights turned off. Passengers began talking again, whispering about the crew's behavior. One man muttered, I paid for luxury, not this attitude. Another added, they don't even pretend to care anymore. Amara listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. She pressed the service button, not because she needed anything, but because she wanted to see what they would do. 2 minutes passed, then 5, no one came. She pressed it again, still no response. Finally, she stood up and walked calmly to the galley, where 2 attendants were talking in low voices. They froze when they saw her, one of them forcing a polite smile. Oh, ma'am, we were just coming. Amara nodded gently. I understand, she said. You seem busy. The attendant laughed nervously. It's been a long night. Amara's tone remained calm but carried a quiet strength. Yes, long nights happen, but kindness doesn't sleep, she said softly. Then she smiled faintly and returned to her seat, leaving them speechless. After she sat down, the pilot made an announcement over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing in New York shortly. We hope you had a pleasant flight. A few passengers chuckled dryly. Pleasant, one muttered. Not quite. The attendants began preparing for landing, rushing through their final tasks, handing out mints and cleaning up trays. Their earlier arrogance was fading into nervousness. The young mother Amara had helped earlier smiled at her shyly. Thank you again for helping me, she whispered. You're calmer than the crew, Amara smiled. Sometimes calmness is the best leadership. As the plane began its descent, the captain's voice came again. Also, a quick note for the cabin crew. Company headquarters has been informed that one of our evaluators is on board tonight. Let's maintain professional courtesy until landing. The crew froze, glancing at each other in panic. Their earlier laughter disappeared instantly. An evaluator? On this flight? One whispered, Who is it? The lead attendant tried to stay composed. Probably some guy in a suit. They always send men, she said. Scanning the cabin nervously, her eyes landed on the businessmen in the front rows. But not once did she look at the quiet woman in seat 2A, who sat peacefully, her notebook now closed. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, Amara's reflection appeared faintly in the window. She looked at herself for a brief moment and whispered, Now it's time! The wheels screeched. The cabin shook slightly and the plane slowed to a stop. Passengers began clapping softly, relieved. The attendants forced cheerful smiles again, pretending the last 10 hours hadn't been filled with mistakes. Amara waited until most passengers had collected their belongings. Then she stood up slowly, stretching her arms. The lead attendant approached with a polite tone. We hope you had a wonderful flight. Ma'am, Amara turned to her and smiled. But this time her smile wasn't just polite. It was knowing, confident. Oh, I did, she said quietly. It was the most revealing flight I've ever taken. The attendant blinked, confused. Revealing? Yes, Amara said softly. You'll understand soon enough. Then she picked up her bag, nodded politely, and walked toward the exit. Her steps were calm, her voice steady, but her presence left a trail of quiet unease behind her. Near the cockpit, the captain waited by the door, his eyes widening slightly when he saw her. He recognized her instantly, the CEO herself. He straightened at once. "Ms. Hayes?" He whispered, stunned. She smiled kindly. "Good landing, Captain. Please ask your crew to stay on board a few minutes after the passengers leave." "Yes, ma'am," he said quickly, his heart pounding. The attendants looked at each other, puzzled. "Wait, what's happening?" One whispered they didn't know it yet, but their flight had just turned into a lesson they would never forget. A lesson about humility, respect, and how a woman who stayed silent for 10 hours was about to speak with the power of 1,000 words. The plane rolled to a smooth stop at the New York runway, the lights of the city glowing through the cabin windows like tiny stars. The passengers began clapping softly, relieved that the long flight was finally over. Flight attendants plastered on their fake smiles, rushing to open compartments and say polite goodbyes. They had no idea that the quiet woman sitting in seat 2A was about to change their lives forever. Amara stayed seated while others hurried to leave. Her calm eyes followed every movement, the nervous glances between the crew, the forced politeness, the exhaustion mixed with arrogance. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have been requested to keep the cabin crew on board for a brief meeting after disembarkation. Thank you for your cooperation." The attendants froze, glancing at each other in confusion. "A meeting? Now?" One whispered nervously. Another frowned. "Maybe it's about that evaluator they mentioned." Passengers began to leave. One by one, some nodded politely at Amara, thanking her for her kindness during the flight. The old man she had helped earlier smiled and said softly, "The world needs more people like you, my dear." She smiled back. "And fewer like them," she replied gently, though he didn't quite understand what she meant. When the last passenger stepped off, the cabin fell silent except for the hum of the engines. The attendants stood near the galley, shifting uneasily, trying to look composed. Their laughter from earlier had completely vanished. The captain stepped out of the cockpit, his face serious. "Ladies and gentlemen of the crew," he said carefully, "there's someone you need to meet." He turned slightly toward Amara, who was now standing near the aisle, her simple black coat buttoned neatly, her notebook still in her hand. The lead attendant blinked, confused. "Who is she?" She whispered to another crew member. Amara turned slowly, her voice calm. "I'm Amara Hayes," she said softly, "CEO of this airline." The color drained from their faces. A few gasped, one even dropped a tray she was holding. The lead attendant stammered, You're Ms. Hayes." Amara nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes, the same woman whose company values you recite during training. The one who pays you to serve with respect and dignity." Silence swallowed the room. No one dared to move. The captain looked at her with quiet respect. Knowing better than to interfere, Amara stepped forward slowly, her heels clicking lightly against the floor. "I boarded this flight under another name," she said, her tone calm but sharp as glass. "I wanted to see how my passengers were treated when no one was watching, and what I saw," she paused, looking at each one of them, "was not service. It was arrogance, hypocrisy, and disrespect." The lead attendant opened her mouth to speak, but Amara raised a hand slightly, stopping her. "Please don't apologize. You've already shown me enough." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried power. Each word hit like a hammer wrapped in silk. She gestured toward the galley. "You laughed at passengers' ignored requests, mocked a woman who asked for help and gave me, your paying customer, a tray meant for economy class." The younger attendants looked down. Ashamed, one whispered, "We didn't know who you were." Amara's gaze softened, but her tone remained steady. "That's exactly the problem," she said quietly. "You shouldn't need to know someone's title to show them respect." The cabin was utterly silent now. Only the faint sound of the engines and the occasional shuffle of feet broke it. The air was thick, heavy with guilt. She took a step closer to the lead attendant, who looked pale. "Tell me," Amara said gently, "when did kindness become optional? When did we forget that service begins with humanity?" The woman tried to speak, tears brimming in her eyes. "Ms. Hayes, please. Amara shook her head slightly. "No excuses, I'm not angry with you. I'm disappointed in myself because this is my company, and somehow I allowed this to happen." Her calm voice made the moment even more powerful. She turned to the captain. "Captain Reynolds, I'll need you to file a report for every crew member on this flight," she said, Effective immediately, this team is suspended pending review. Gasps filled the air. One attendant broke down crying. Please, Ms. Hayes. We didn't mean harm, we were tired, it was just one bad day. Amara's eyes softened for a brief second. And every passenger you mistreated today had a bad day too. But you didn't care, she said. That's not exhaustion. That's pride. She closed her notebook slowly. I built this airline on the belief that people can fly with comfort and dignity. But comfort isn't just about soft seats. It's about how you make others feel, and tonight, you've reminded me that we have forgotten that. She looked around one last time, her calm voice returning to a whisper. You may all go now, but reflect on this. One act of disrespect can ground a lifetime of reputation. Then she turned to the captain again. Please escort them off duty. I'll handle their replacements personally. The crew walked toward the exit in silence. Their heads lowered, no one dared to argue. The lead attendant stopped briefly and whispered, We're sorry, Ms. Hayes. Amara gave her a small, calm nod. I hope someday you mean that. As the last of them left, the cabin felt lighter, quieter. The captain turned to her. That was powerful, ma'am, she smiled faintly. It wasn't power, Captain. It was a reminder. She looked out the window at the glowing runway lights, her reflection shining faintly against the glass. An airline doesn't fly because of engines, she said softly. It flies because of people. Then she picked up her handbag, tucked her notebook inside, and walked off the plane, leaving behind silence, humility, and a lesson that would echo through every wing of her company. Kindness is the real first-class service. The news spread through the company like wildfire by sunrise. Every employee, from the headquarters boardroom to the smallest airport desk, knew what had happened on Flight 407. The CEO had flown undercover and fired the entire luxury-class crew after landing. The story felt almost unbelievable. Some called it brave, others called it ruthless. But those who truly knew Amara Hayes understood one thing. She hadn't done it out of anger. She had done it to wake up a company that had fallen asleep in its own pride. Amara arrived at the New York headquarters early that morning. Her black coat still smelled faintly of airplane cabin air. The guards at the door greeted her nervously as if afraid to speak. Inside, whispers followed her down the hallway like a shadow. A few employees avoided eye contact. Others straightened immediately when she passed. She moved quietly, her calm presence heavier than any shout could be. In the top-floor conference room, her executive team was waiting, looking uneasy. Charts and schedules were laid out on the table, but no one dared to start the meeting. The head of operations cleared his throat. Ms. Hayes, we heard about the incident. We were planning to investigate, Amara interrupted softly. There's no need to investigate, I was there. The room fell silent. She placed her brown notebook on the table, its edges slightly worn from the flight. Do you know what I saw? She said, her voice low but sharp. I saw employees wearing my company's wings forget that every person who walks into our planes deserves respect. I saw arrogance sold as confidence and indifference mistaken for efficiency. The marketing director tried to speak. Ma'am, this may have been an isolated crew. Amara raised her hand slightly, silencing him. No, it wasn't isolated. I've been reading complaints for months. We ignored them, we gave warnings, we offered training, but nothing changes when hearts remain closed. Her tone wasn't angry, but every word carried weight. She looked out the window at the skyline, the morning sun cutting across her reflection. I started this airline because I wanted people to feel human in the sky. I wanted travelers to be treated like guests. Not numbers, but somewhere along the way, we lost that. The room stayed quiet, no one dared to speak. The human resources manager finally whispered, What do you plan to do next, ma'am? Amara turned back to them, her calm eyes steady. We rebuild, she said simply, from the inside out. Within hours, she issued an internal memo across the company. It read, Effective immediately. All senior and junior crew members are to attend new training programs on empathy, ethics, and passenger experience. The focus will no longer be luxury service, but human service. Promotions and bonuses will now depend on passenger feedback, not rank or hours flown. From today, kindness is policy. The message went viral within minutes, shared across social media and news outlets. CEO reinvents airline after undercover flight experience, the headlines read. Some praised her boldness, others questioned her decision, but everyone was talking about her. That evening, Amara sat alone in her office. the city lights glittering outside her window. She poured herself a cup of tea and leaned back in her chair. For the first time in months, she felt calm. She thought of the old man she helped with his seatbelt, the young mother whose baby she comforted, and the nervous passengers she had reassured during turbulence. That was what her company was supposed to stand for. Not perfection, but humanity. Suddenly, there was a knock on her door. It was the captain from Flight 407, still in uniform. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "I just wanted to say what you did. It changed everyone. The new crew that replaced them today, they serve differently." They smiled differently. "It's like they remembered why they joined." Amara smiled faintly. "That's good to hear, Captain. That's all I wanted." "Not revenge, remembrance." He hesitated before leaving. "Ma'am," he said softly, "the old crew sent you a letter. They asked me to give it to you." She took the envelope silently and opened it after he left. Inside was a simple handwritten note. "We're sorry. Ms. Hayes, you were right. We forgot who we were. Thank you for reminding us, even if it cost us everything." Her eyes softened. She placed the letter inside her notebook, where she had once written about their failures, now keeping it as a reminder of change. The next day, she walked into the training hall unannounced. Dozens of flight attendants stood in rows, practicing greetings and procedures. When they saw her, whispers spread instantly. Amara raised a hand gently. "Please continue," she said. Her calm tone filled the room. "Don't fear me. Learn from me." She walked between the rows, speaking softly. "Every passenger you meet has a story. Some are tired, some are lost, some just need a smile. You don't need power to change their day. You just need heart." By the time she finished, some of the younger attendants had tears in their eyes. The room felt different. Not like a training hall, but like the rebirth of a purpose. That night, Amara stood outside the hangar, watching one of her planes prepare for takeoff. The engines rumbled, lights blinking under the dark sky. She whispered quietly to herself, "Let them fly with kindness this time." A soft wind brushed against her hair as the plane lifted into the clouds. Disappearing into the night, she smiled faintly, knowing her company would never be the same again. Because sometimes change doesn't begin with a speech or a headline. It begins with a quiet woman who sits in seat 2A and refuses to accept that kindness has limits. Weeks passed after the infamous Flight 407 incident, but its echoes continued to ripple through the entire aviation industry. News channels, business magazines, and social media were still buzzing with one name: Amara Hayes, the CEO who disguised herself as a passenger and changed her company overnight. Some called her ruthless, some called her revolutionary, but to the thousands of employees who worked under her, she had become something deeper, a mirror of truth. Inside the airline headquarters, things had transformed completely. The walls that once displayed glossy posters of luxury now carried a new slogan written in bold letters: "Luxury begins with respect." Every department worked differently now. Customer service had grown warmer. Flight crews smiled genuinely, and for the first time in years, Amara's airline started receiving heartfelt thank you letters instead of complaints. One morning, Amara arrived at the training center unannounced again. She wore her usual black coat, no jewelry, no bodyguards. Her presence was quiet but commanding. The new recruits had just finished a session on empathy in the sky. When they noticed her, the room fell silent. She smiled softly and said, "Please, don't stop because of me, keep going." The instructor, nervous but proud, said, "Ma'am, we were just discussing your story." Amara chuckled lightly. "My story? It's not mine anymore, it belongs to all of you. It's a story of how one mistake can change a company if we're willing to learn from it." One of the trainees raised her hand timidly. "Ma'am, is it true you were treated badly on purpose? That they didn't recognize you?" Amara nodded slowly. "Yes, but that's not what hurt me," she said softly. "What hurt me was realizing that kindness had become rare. I wasn't angry because they disrespected me. I was heartbroken because they disrespected humanity." The room grew quiet again. Her words weren't harsh, but they sank deep into everyone's hearts. She continued, "You see, when people buy a ticket, they're not paying for food or seats. They're paying for dignity. They trust us with their time, their safety, their comfort. We can't betray that trust." After the session, Amara walked through the hallway, watching the trainees interact with each other. Laughing, helping, practicing kind gestures. It felt alive again, like the company she had once dreamed of. Later that afternoon, she visited a hangar where an aircraft was being repainted. The maintenance crew stepped aside as she approached. The new paint shimmered under the sunlight, her airline's logo beside a small quote printed beneath the cockpit window. "Every flight carries hearts, not just passengers." Amara stood there for a long moment, her eyes glistening. That was the exact phrase her late father had told her years ago when she first started the airline. It reminded her of why she began in the first place. Not to build a company, but to build connection. Just then, the captain from Flight 407 walked up, smiling. "The crew you suspended. Ma'am, they've written again." Amara looked at him curiously. "Oh?" He handed her a sealed envelope. She opened it and found a new letter written in careful handwriting. "We've joined a small regional airline now, ma'am, and we're doing things differently this time. We greet every passenger like you were sitting among them. Thank you for the lesson that saved our careers, not ruined them." Amara read the words quietly, then smiled. "That's all I ever wanted," she whispered. As evening fell, she returned home and placed the letter inside her brown notebook. Beside the original notes from that flight, her pen hovered for a moment before she wrote a single new line. "The sky forgives those who learn." Outside her window, planes streaked across the golden clouds like threads of light. Her airline had changed, but so had she. She no longer led from the top of a tower. She led from the seat of a passenger. The next morning, she boarded another flight quietly, this time not to test anyone, but to remind herself that humility must travel as often as ambition. The attendant smiled warmly as she offered her tea. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," she said with genuine kindness. Amara smiled back. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's good to be home in the sky again." As the engines roared and the plane lifted from the runway, Amara looked out at the horizon, the sunrise painting gold across the clouds. She closed her notebook and whispered to herself, "Now they fly for the right reason, because in the end, the woman once denied a meal in luxury class had served the world something far greater. A reminder that true class has nothing to do with money, and everything to do with humanity." The months rolled by, and the story of the undercover CEO flight had become a legend across the aviation world. Newscasters still spoke of it as one of the most remarkable leadership decisions in corporate history. People who had never even flown before knew the story of a woman who sat silently in seat 2A, denied a meal, and turned that humiliation into a movement of humility. But for Amara Hayes, life had returned to a calm rhythm. She no longer chased recognition or control. Her joy now came from walking through terminals unnoticed, watching her employees greet travelers with genuine warmth, and hearing real laughter between passengers and crew. Her airline had changed, not by rule, but by heart. On a bright spring morning, she arrived at the international terminal wearing her simple black coat as always. She wasn't flying for business this time, but for something personal. A new training academy for young flight attendants was being inaugurated, named in her honor, the Hayes Institute of Aviation Ethics. She hadn't chosen the name. Her team had surprised her with it. When she walked into the grand hall, hundreds of employees and trainees stood and applauded. A large banner read, "Where service meets soul." Amara smiled gently. Humbled by the moment, she took the stage, adjusted the microphone and said softly, "Please sit. We have work to do." The room quieted immediately. Her tone wasn't that of a powerful CEO. It was of a mentor, a teacher. "When I first flew in seat 2A, she began, I wasn't testing anyone. I was reminding myself what it felt like to be unseen, to be ignored, and in that silence I learned the loudest truth. Power means nothing without empathy." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Today, you will learn about safety, discipline, and protocol," she continued. "But remember this, when a passenger looks lost, scared, or tired, don't see them as another ticket number. See them as someone who trusted you with their journey. That trust is sacred." The trainees listened, mesmerized, some wiping away quiet tears. She spoke not from authority, but from experience, from pain turned into purpose. "I once wrote a rule that every plane must carry luxury meals," she said, smiling faintly. "Now I've changed that rule. Every plane must carry kindness first." The hall erupted in applause. Not the formal kind, but the warm, emotional sound of people who felt inspired. After the ceremony, as people mingled, a young trainee approached her shyly, holding a small letter. "Ma'am," she said, "I wasn't sure if I should give this, but my mother was on the flight that day." The one where you were denied your meal, she was the woman with the baby you helped. Amara's eyes softened. Oh, she whispered, surprised. How is she? The girl smiled. She's the reason I'm here. She told me that day she saw a stranger show more kindness than an entire crew, and that she wanted me to grow up and serve others the way you served her. She told me to give you this. Amara unfolded the letter slowly. The handwriting was delicate but firm. Dear Ms. Hayes, you may not remember me, but I'll never forget you the day you helped me. You weren't just a passenger. You were proof that goodness still exists in the sky. I hope you keep flying. Not just planes, but hearts. Amara folded the note with trembling fingers and smiled. Your mother gave me more than a reason to fly, she said softly. She gave me a reason to believe. As the sun set outside, Amara walked toward the observation deck, planes taking off one after another into the orange sky. The hum of engines filled the air. She leaned on the railing, her heart full, and whispered to herself, every journey begins with kindness. Her reflection in the glass looked peaceful, older perhaps, but fulfilled. She didn't need applause, headlines, or luxury. Her success wasn't in profit margins or awards. It was in every smile on every flight that carried her name. And as another plane lifted gracefully into the fading light, Amara closed her eyes and whispered, fly high, but never above compassion. Because the woman who was once denied a meal had given the world something far greater. A legacy that fed the soul. A story that would be told for generations. Reminding everyone that the sky is vast, but true greatness travels humbly.